This is my smallest building block when I started to design with light. How much information can a pixel really tell us? Well, it could be on, it could be off. This is how Morse code already works. There's already a lot more than that. And maybe we can turn it around, move it around in 3D space, 3 dimensions. That's pretty fun. That's the most that we can experience with our senses as humans. But with technology, we can add to that. How about adding time? I think this is something that everybody has done before. At New Year's, you take a candle or a sparkler and you move it around. You set a camera to long exposure photography and you make a heart or something. Now, you can take this technique and do even more with it. This is a picture by Janne Paviainen. He also took a single pixel and was able to paint landscapes with it. What's the difference between the image that I just showed you and this one? I would argue that it's intent. He intended to create a piece of artwork. Now, artwork is subjective. You could argue that what I showed you before is also art. It's not my opinion personally. But that's for everybody to decide for themselves. With no more than just the position of a pixel, he was able to create an entire landscape. He was able to tell a story. It's very little information. This is so much more interesting than a picture of the same room, despite the fact that it gives us much less information. Reduction is key, and context is key. So, what other information can a pixel give us? How about we change our input? How about we make it auto-reactive? Now, this kind of opens up an entire new world for us. There's so much lighting design out there that only has to do with making light interact with music. Everybody here has been to a concert before, where there's a huge light show. There's an entire branch dedicated to it. And that brings me to the first project that I want to show to you. The very first music video that I ever directed, which was all about connecting light with sound. In 2014, we were approached by Red Bull to do something that had never been done before, to attach LEDs to the wingsuits of skydivers, and to have them fly in the air and sync up the colors to the song. We were asked, I was very scared at first. I wasn't entirely sure if we were going to be able to do it. They were asking us to create a technology that worked from 2,000 meters up in the air all the way to 0 meters. It had to be wireless, and it had to work without fail, and it had to work in the complete dark. Extreme conditions. I was afraid that it might be dangerous even. It wasn't only just the most technologically complicated project that I've ever worked on. But after doing some research and realizing that we could keep the danger very low, I decided to say yes, and we took the project on. Now this is something that I've done quite a few times in my career, is taking on something where I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to do it. I usually find out quite quickly that I'm actually completely out of my league, but I never get too worried about it, because I know that even if I can't do it, I can find people and surround myself with people who can. You should always find people who are better than you in some way, from strangers on the internet to talented friends. If you're the stupidest person in the room, you've done something right. Now, in my case, I didn't know how to do the electronics on this project. It was pretty complicated, so I brought along my good friend, an incredibly talented engineer, Jürgen Kolb. So together we worked on the kinks of how we could work out the electronical problems with this project, while I developed simultaneously the choreography with the wingsuit team themselves. And after half a year of work, this was the result. While this is the most technologically complicated project that I've ever worked on, it's conceptually minimal. If you break it down to its most base pieces, it's basically just 4 points of light flying through 3D space. So what makes it interesting? Why is it interesting? Well, like I said before, context is everything. When we look at projects like these, we have to break it down into several elements. First, let's define our tools. In this case, we had our LED suits, and we had a camera. Then comes the artistic part: input, interpretation, and output. Our input for this project was music, my favorite input. The interpretation was 2 parts: the choreography, which came from the Red Bull skydiving team themselves, and my responsibility was color. The output was video. Now, while this was an actual thing that happened, nobody could experience this. I mean, unless you're a nighttime skydiver, and there's not that many of them, you couldn't experience it. So we created a video instead. When creating anything, you always have to be aware of what your output will be. Are you a light designer who's creating a show for thousands of people? Are you a photographer who's creating a single picture that will be viewed online or in a gallery, like the first project that we saw? Or are you going to create a video like this? Even when creating this talk, I had to think about what my ultimate output was. I'm speaking to you here in the audience, but also I'm speaking to everybody who's online. Will my LEDs be strong enough for the video? Will the cube be positioned well enough so that all the cameras can get a good perspective? These are elements that you have to think whenever you're creating. So now we take a look at dots and pixels. Let's add a dimension. Let's put a bunch of pixels next to each other and create a one-dimensional object, a line. Designers love lines. They crop up in art pieces, stage designs, corporate designs, and large-scale installations. I had a phase in university where I loved lines as well. But in comparison to these artists, it was not a very particularly good phase. I was studying digital art at the University of Applied Arts of Vienna. And for a couple of years, I'd been wandering farther and farther away from art and more towards show design, set design for music videos, stage design for big festivals. You know, I thought I was a hotshot because I was working with artists and festivals. But I was basically failing university. My professors were going to throw me out, and they gave me one last chance. They said, create a piece of art that shows us that you truly understand artistic qualities, and you understand the difference between art and design, and you can stay. As with many artists, I work best when I'm under pressure, and the pressure was on. So I swallowed my pride, and I learned the lesson that I told you before. I asked for help. I was getting the hang of electronics at this point, but I was still grappling with the fundamental approach how to create with light artistically. So I reached out to my good friend, David Osthoff, and I asked him to help develop a piece of art with me. The first part of the equation was already given to us. Our input was electromagnetic transducer. Now, it's a complicated word, but we were taking a workshop at the time with an artist called Christina Kubisch. And an electromagnetic transducer is nothing more than a device that takes electromagnetic signals, like radio, Wi-Fi, power lines, and translates them into audio. So we made an LED stick, a little like this one, that would display how loud the audio was. That's all it did. You know, not the artistic revolution that I was thinking about. But like I said before, context is everything. And using the same method as in the project before, we were able to use long exposure photography in order to create waveforms. You know, we walk back and forth with this and take long exposure photography. All of a sudden, we were creating waveforms in the air that revealed a hidden world that nobody else could see, these electromagnetic signals. And suddenly the most mundane things became absolutely fascinating. What you're hearing now is the sound of cars that are passing. You can hear the electronics inside of them. The high tones are newer cars. Older cars have much lower electronics. This is my favorite. You can hear the subways passing through 10 meters of concrete. Using light, we were able to illuminate the world in a different way and show hidden worlds that was much different than just turning on a light bulb. ultimately, they let me stay in university. I eventually dropped out to the great disappointment of my mother, who's here today. Sorry, Mom. And in the process, I learned exactly what I needed to know. How to artistically approach designing with light. And more importantly, how to swallow my pride and ask for help. So let's add another layer of complexity. Let's add another dimension. Let's go from a line to a square. Now, I don't have a prop for you here because we've had a prop like this on stage the entire time. This screen. Now, I don't only create with LEDs, I also create plenty of video content. And the entirety of the body of my work fits on this two-dimensional, flat, boring screen. Honestly, it's a shame. I believe everybody should experience everything in real time if possible. But ultimately, this is the truth. Most of the content that we consume will be consumed on a two-dimensional screen. Maybe holograms will change this in the future, but for now, this is what we've got. Now, working with two-dimensional objects, also known as planes, for the first time we have to decide, do we want to work with LEDs, emitted light, or projectors, projected light? Now, projection mapping is one of the most common tools in the arsenal of a video or light artist. And the way that you create content or visuals for that is vastly different than how you create content for LEDs. In fact, it's so different that I'm not even going to get into it right now. We want to talk about lights. Now, for sure, light artists love squares just as much as they love any other simple geometric object. Simplicity is one of the main things that light artists love. You have everything else gone except for the single object that you're trying to show. Now, plenty of artists still use squares. And this is ultimately the same reason why I decided to only use geometric objects when I was talking to you today, because of simplicity. So in that vein, let's go to our final geometric object of the night, the mighty cube. Three-dimensional objects are such strong symbols to us because they're so much more immersive. We live in a three-dimensional world. When we see something that shares that multidimensionality with us, it's striking. Feels a lot more close. But when you add complexity and scale like we have here, you always do it at the cost of something. In this case, it's mobility. I can't really move this cube, but it's strong enough of a symbol that it can just stand on its own. So I'd like to show you one last project today. My very first light project that consisted of nothing but cubes. Now, until now, I've been talking about projects that I asked for help, but in this way, it went both ways. My good friend Benjamin Frehner had an idea which pretty much started my entire career. He knew that I was studying digital art, and as a carpenter, he wanted to add something to his craft. And he wanted to combine it with something new. This is a theme that I've taken and I've done throughout my career, recombination. Recombination is taking several fields and putting them into one for a single art piece. And it's one of the greatest tools for innovation. I didn't know anything about electronics when I started this, but with Benny's idea and his push, we created something special together, and I had to learn. At the time, I was a DJ and a finger drummer, and I thought it was really cool, and I wanted to create something that had to do with that. Element of performance was very important to me. And we put together a stage show that involved my finger drumming. So now the input was still music, but it was my rhythmic interpretation, my finger drumming that was actually driving the light. And this is what that looked like. Now, this was 5 years ago, so obviously I was into dubstep. But because I didn't know anything about the world of lighting, I turned to the internet for help this time. Tutorials, YouTubes, internet forums, that was my classroom. It was amazing to me how many people would just decide to help you for nothing. They liked your idea, they would help you. They would look over your code, they would give you links to electronics that you could work with. And with the power of an idea, you can give people the energy to help you, whether it's small or in big ways. You really don't need to know too much about a topic in order to create something great. We're living in a world of generalists, and the more that you know about small individual pieces of a topic, the better. I mean, I always say that I'm a jack of all trades, but a master of none. I only know how to take small snippets of code or small bits and pieces of electronic knowledge and put them together for a single project. So after I was finished with this project, I put all the code online so that people could tinker with it, but my main point was that I wanted to show people that you didn't need to be an expert in these things in order to make it happen. Now, the problem with sharing information so openly is that lazy people tend to copy your ideas. Here are a few examples of that. Our work was copied in Italy, in the UK, and in Russia. Two of these examples I feel a little bit of disdain for. But the third, the old Spiral Stargate in the UK, this was exactly what I was talking about this entire time. This woman, Karen Pritchard, wrote me on Facebook, and she asked for tips in creating her own stage design. So I sent her example code, I sent her links to hardware, I sent her tutorials, and she created this. I mean, to be honest, I was quite surprised that it looked pretty much the same of my own installation that I created, but that was beyond the point. Ultimately, I was proud. This was a 50-year-old woman who had no background in electronics or art, but she took the right step. She found the right people, and she asked for help. So to anybody who is interested in designing with light, just go for it. All you have to do is ask. So let's put together everything we've learned today. Let's take an input. How about this thing? It's called a MIDI controller. And as our artistic interpretation, let's try my fingers. And our output, we can make it light and music.